As Silk Road fabrics from the east became all the rage in imperial Rome, because apparently togas weren't breathable enough, explorers and merchants decided it was high time to poke holes in the map and open up land and sea routes to Central Asia and beyond. In 166 AD, Chinese chroniclers reported that ambassadors from the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, yes, that Marcus Aurelius, stoic philosopher king and reluctant star of Gladiator, showed up at the imperial court of Luoyang in east central China. Their arrival was met with an unusual mix of curiosity and skepticism, like someone showing up to a royal wedding wearing Crocs. They had journeyed via Malaysia, hugged the coasts of Thailand and Vietnam, and eventually docked at a Chinese port near the mouth of the Red River in the Gulf of Tonkin. Escorted like low-budget VIPs by the Chinese military authorities, they journeyed overland another 1,200 miles, passing fortresses and walled cities like it was a medieval version of GeoGuessr. The Chinese were buzzing. They had long heard of Rome, known as Daqin, or the Great China, which sounds flattering until you realize it's basically calling someone you but foreign. But this was the first time they'd gotten actual Roman receipts. During the reign of Augustus, silk had ensnared the Roman upper class like a fashionable plague. The first century poet Martial drooled over kisses scented like silken robes of the empress, proving that every Roman poetry had a lingerie ad vibe. Tablets from the same era included the term siricaria, like referring to an enslaved person whose entire job was to babysit silk outfits. Men, ever the pioneers of fragile masculinity, also started donning silk, which horrified Roman moralists. According to the historian Tacitus, Rome's favorite grumpy grandpa, the Senate actually had to pass a decree banning men from degrading their gender with silky outfits. Apparently, well-dressed men were a threat to the empire. Not that everyone cared. Suetonius tells us that Caligula, the wild emperor from 37 to 41 AD, paraded around in silk and even women's robes. Fabulous. And when those Roman ambassadors finally arrived in China, they showed up bearing trinkets: ivory, rhinoceros horns, turtle shells. Basically, they brought the inventory of a cursed antique shop and called it diplomacy. The Chinese emperor was not impressed. The court quietly wondered, were these guys even legit? Or were they just scrappy hustlers? Even their route made no sense. They'd come through Vietnam, not the established Gansu corridor, China's actual silk highway connecting the Yellow River Basin with Central Asia. Zhang Xian, Chinese diplomat and ancient overachiever, had ventured through that corridor way back in the 2nd century BC, paving the path for the Silk Roads like a Chinese Lewis and Clark. Meanwhile, in the West, curiosity about the East had kicked off centuries earlier. Alexander the Great, never one to avoid travel, dragged his armies to the Indus River and founded cities as if he was playing a real-life version of civilization. But when it came to reaching the Far East, the earliest viable route was maritime. From Alexandria under the Ptolemaic dynasty, the journey of these Roman ambassadors underscored the expanding web of trade routes across the ancient world, or at least the ones that didn't end in death by dysentery. Sometimes exploration doesn't start with bold intentions, but with dumb luck. Case in point, the discovery of the maritime route to the Far East began when a Red Sea patrol stumbled across a lost ship with one half-dead Indian sailor aboard. Since no one spoke his language, they did what any responsible maritime authority would do: abducted him for cultural enrichment in Alexandria. Once the man picked up enough Greek, he explained that he'd just taken an unscheduled tour of the high seas. Grateful for their hospitality, and probably glad they didn't just chuck him back in the water, he offered to guide any ship that could take him home. Enter Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II, king of Egypt and a man with a way too complicated name. He appointed Eudoxus of Cyzicus, a Greek explorer turned ambassador turned Indiana Jones LARPer, to lead the expedition. Eudoxus learned all about Nile routes and the Red Sea myths and grilled the Indian sailor on the monsoon season like he was prepping for a travel vlog. Using the winds that blow towards India from March to September and back toward Egypt from October to February, Eudoxus crossed the Indian Ocean in just weeks. He swapped gifts with local rajas, picked up spices and jewels, and returned to Alexandria like he just got back from Bed Bath & Beyond on a Black Friday. The age of maritime trade was officially open for business. After the Romans snatched Egypt in 30 BC, Alexandria transformed into the Amazon hub of the ancient world. Goods from the east were hauled to the Red Sea, strapped to camels, hauled across the desert to the Nile, then floated to Alexandria, and finally across the Mediterranean. The city buzzed with Syrians, Arabs, Persians, Indians, and a lot of cultural crossover. A papyrus found in an ancient Egyptian city I can't pronounce reveals a comic play called Charitian, set in India, complete with a drunk Raja, a farting fool, and Indian-speaking gibberish meant to parody barbarian tongues. Yes, ancient Egypt had racism too. Everything and everyone passed through Coptos, a Nile-side trade hub. Caravans launched from here, crossing the brutal eastern desert, mostly at night to avoid being cooked by the sun. Along the way, military outposts provided food and water, while tolls were extracted like an ancient DMV. Skilled artisans paid 8 drachmas, sailors 5, soldiers' wives 20, and prostitutes a whopping 108 drachmas. Apparently sex work wasn't just taxed, it was super taxed. Red Sea ports like Myos Hormos and Berenice became traffic-choked hotspots. Merchants from Greece, Egypt, and Arabia gathered like TikTokers at Coachella, eagerly awaiting ships from India packed with ivory, pearls, sandalwood, silk, and spices. They sent back wine and other Western goods. Under Roman rule, Myos Hormos alone sent out up to 120 ships to India annually. A staggering jump from the days when Eudoxus was basically doing solo Kessel runs like Han Solo. A first-century merchant's handbook, Periplus Maris Erythraea, detailed where Indian Ocean ships docked: Barigasa in Gujarat, Muziris in Kerala, and Poduk in Puducherry. Those ports were not sleepy backwaters. They were the Vegas Strip for traders, performers, concubines, intellectuals, and priests. Muziris even had a temple to Augustus, because when in doubt, worship the guy on your new coins. A bold student in Alexandria might now skip the Nile booze cruise and hop on a vessel to India instead. But few dare to go beyond. Though the Periplus confirmed silk came from China via Himalayan routes to Barigaza, the Chinese remained as mysterious to Romans as the plot of Squid Game. Known as the Saris, silk people, they were so unfamiliar that Romans imagined them as blonde and blue-eyed, confusing them with Afghan middlemen. The poet Virgil describes silk as if it were tree fluff. The Saris comb from off the leaves their silky fleece. An admirable guess, only about as accurate as thinking Athens was really a democracy. Merchants reaching India usually didn't go further. Some stopped at Chaprobane in Sri Lanka, then passed through the Strait of Malacca to Kathiawar in the Mekong Delta. There, archaeologists have found Roman-style gems, coins bearing Marcus Aurelius and Antonius Pius, and a wild East meets West culture. It's even possible that those ambassadors we were talking about earlier in Luoyang were actually Kathiawaran traders pretending to be Romans. Ancient world cosplay, basically. Not everyone preferred the sea, though. Some masochistic merchants opted for the land route, by camel across hostile terrain, steppes, deserts, and bandits for months on end. Arabian Nabateans once brought incense from Yemen to Petra, where Indiana Jones got the Holy Grail, then to the ports of Egypt and Gaza. Palmyra, dubbed the Venice of the Sands, handled silks, pearls, and spices. But Roman emperors, being control freaks, wanted to cut out the middlemen and go full on with China. Overland. Through enemy territory. What could go wrong? Well, quite a bit actually. The Parthians, Rome's nemesis and the reigning supervillains of the East, blocked Roman caravans and rerouted them to their own markets. But that didn't stop the Romans from trying. Isidore of Charax, possibly an Augustan-era geographer and all-around map nerd, published Parthian stations listing towns, strongholds, and where to top off your camel's metaphorical gas tank. Geographers Ptolemy and Marinus of Tyre also mention Maius Titanus, a Macedonian who bankrolled an epic road trip to China. His traders started in Syria, crossed Mesopotamia, reached Bactria in modern-day Afghanistan, then kept trudging towards Tashgorgan, Kashgar, and finally the border of Chinese territory. That journey took nearly 2 years. There's no evidence, though, that they ever reached the Han capital. Chinese records insist the first Roman contact came in 166 AD via Vietnam. But Maia's crew gave it a go. And frankly, compared to the weeks-long sail across the Indian Ocean, dragging yourself across Eurasia with a herd of camels and no GPS sounds like a logistical nightmare. For most Westerners, the East remained a fantasy sold at market. Merchants peddled silks while spinning tales of dragons, magic trees, and fabulous cities, basically ancient infomercials. Over the centuries, the Silk Roads carried everything from languages and inventions to enslaved people and pandemics. Trade surged again under the Tang dynasty between 618 and 907, and peaked once more under the Mongols in the 13th and 14th centuries. Because if there's one thing the Mongols loved more than conquest, it was toll booths. But when the Ottomans started taxing the out of overland trade, merchants switched to sea routes. And in that quest to bypass the Silk Roads, a certain Genoese man named Christopher Columbus got hilariously lost and accidentally discovered the Americas instead. So yes, the Silk Roads may be gone, but their legacy lives on. In your silk pajamas, your turmeric latte, and the fact that somewhere out there a Roman coin is probably buried in a Vietnamese rice paddy.